and welcome on a very, very cold Thursday, London Thursday evening to For the Record, your favorite show on TV. And we're going to get right into it. We're running slightly late. Apologies for the delay, but we're going to be flying off quick and fast. And my very first guest on the show is the founder and global CEO of Innovate Africa, a specialist diaspora organization dealing with a lot of stuff as it affects Africa. He goes by the name Dotun Adeoye. How are you doing, sir?
I'm fine, thank you.
In our conversation as you walked in, you told me you're coming in from Birmingham and it's quite warm in London.
Very warm.
Okay, maybe I need to come and get some orientation outside London and get warm before we do these shows. How are you doing?
Well, I'm fine.
Okay, Innovate Africa. What's it about?
Well, Innovate Africa is an organization aimed at using innovation to create new things on the continent of Africa. Entrepreneurs, work opportunities, and it's predicated on the fact that every country in the world that has gone from poverty to prosperity went through the innovation route. If we look at the US, the UK, China, Asian countries, all the different countries in the world, there is no country that is wealthy today that didn't get there through innovation. So Innovate Africa is purely to galvanize and pull together the African diaspora to leverage their network, their skill set to drive prosperity into Africa. Okay,
so it, in a nutshell, you want to harness the very best of African diaspora and take that back home to develop and sustain. Without necessarily digging deep, my first concern is for that to happen, there needs to be a certain existing structure on ground in Africa. Is that structure available right now?
Thank you. Well, I think charity begins at home, so we need structures on the ground. Now, Innovate Africa, it is a private entity. It's nothing to do with government or government initiatives. We have partners and collaborators in different African countries.
Existing already.
Existing already.
Okay.
So a good example is in Botswana. We do have some partners who are within the academia, giving some examples of the type of innovation and the innovators doing things in the Botswana space. In Nigeria, as an example, we have a Chamber of Commerce that the head always feeds us with opportunities, partnership opportunities about what's happening on a day-to-day basis.
Sector to sector?
Sector to sector. We also have in Kenya, as an example, we have a partner organization. So in the different parts of Africa, we do have partners. However, we are starting from the Western world. So we looking to collaborate, pull together a lot of the African experts and friends of Africa, and also everyone that is of African extraction, either by immigration or slave trade descendants or whatever it is. Those who have a vested interest in Africa directly or indirectly, to pull them together to collaborate in terms of entering the African market, exchanging skill sets, getting insight. So yes, the partnerships are there. Yes, we have partners already on the ground in different countries, and it's evolving and developing every day.
The global narrative about Africa is not it's not really a very exciting one. If you look at all your major frontline global media, what you tend to hear about Africa is either there's a war zone, or there's famine, or there are diseases. And you've alluded to working with diasporans of different extractions. So it could be our generation that grew up back home and came over here, or those that were born here. And how do you start to give incentive? What are the incentives to make them start to look in that direction and try and overlook all the global narrative that we see and hear every day?
That's a good question. So Innovate Africa is a we are a social enterprise. And one of the key things is that we are always looking for those who can support us from a voluntary basis to other types of support. One of the things we also do on a daily basis is social media, sharing narrative of good news coming out of different African countries. So we have an example of a car manufacturing story coming out of Kenya, coming out of Nigeria, We have a guy who is in Lesotho. We ran a series of stories on this guy. We have a series of young girls in South Africa who kind of flew some, built a plane.
Yeah.
We have different stories. In Egypt, there was a group of girls who built a kitchen app. We cover success stories that will inspire the young generation, our generation that is thinking, well, it's all bad news, to be able to counter what your mainstream media is portraying about war, about famine. It's all gloom and doom. But ultimately, where we're heading as well is having our own platform to be able to share this, consistently. So we are aware of the challenges. We are aware that when you talk Africa, most think it's a country, and it's a country that is always war and trouble.
Donald Trump comes to mind.
Yeah, well, we don't want to talk what type of hole he called it. However, basically, we're trying to show the good side.
Okay.
Well, like every family, you always have the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Indeed.
The African continent, as it is, we do have our challenges, but it's not all gloom and doom. For instance, there was more millionaires on the continent of Africa in 2018 than the whole of China. Now, China is bigger than Africa. That's why I'm making that comparison. And they have a lot of interest in Africa.
Indeed.
However, it's not all gloom and doom. You have a lot of, currently, you have the owner of Twitter, just recently.
In Lagos.
He went to Nigeria. Mark Zuckerberg, the first country he went to, he went to Africa recently, few African countries. You also have, Jack Ma, the owner of Alibaba, who is now all over Africa. So there's something happening on the continent that the media is not showing. But some time ago, someone told me it's called dark marketing, whereby you want to sort of chase away your competitors so that they don't go where you're making your money.
So you think that could be orchestrated as well?
I'm not insinuating, but someone told me, I went to an event and he said there's something called dark marketing. So it might be some tactic by some of these organizations to actually chase potential investors or competitors. Because if you think about what is happening, the good news from Rwanda as an example.
Indeed.
Rwanda is a poster boy for Africa. I mean, it's not a perfect country, but when you think about what is happening in Rwanda.
And what has happened not too very far past.
Not too long ago. It's wonderful. And you look at countries like Ethiopia as an example, what they are doing in the textile industry. A lot of things are happening that we should be shouting about. And that's what we try to do on our social media regularly.
At Innovate Africa. You look at Africa has a lot of challenges, and it now begs the question, in the midst of this whole myriad of problems, what would be Innovate Africa's immediate focus?
Well, Africa has a myriad of problems. I've been saying that since we started this section. But we look at the key areas. How do you create wealth? I think one of the key challenges we've had is we have a very colonial education system where we are trained to become technocrats. We are trained to become civil servants. It's one of the biggest challenges we have. So one of the things we're trying to focus on is to create a new generation of entrepreneurs. Because if you create entrepreneurs, you can create wealth. And entrepreneurship in the right space. Now, there's been a lot of success and success story in the IT sector of a lot of, techpreneurs and all that. But when you look at the continent of Africa, farming is one of the key areas.
Indeed.
So how do you take farming and turn it into a success story? How do you take, the darkness we have in a lot of different places where there's no power? How do you break into that space and create a solution in that space? How do you create affordable housing in a lot of the slums? In Kenya,
Kibera slum, biggest in Africa.
Yeah, in Kibera, you have Ajegunle in Nigeria.
Yes.
You have a lot of slums in South Africa, Makoko and all those places. So it's basically thinking of all these key low-hanging fruits. Agriculture, healthcare, our education certificates are not recognized in most places. So how do we tackle this? And these are the focal points and focal industry that we are kind of looking into to start with.
The next question I'm going to throw at you right now is, you have sister organizations or partner organizations in Africa you're working with.
Yes.
And a lot of these things are kind of huge projects that you would need support of governments. How have African governments embraced Innovate Africa to make this easier for you?
Well, I think Innovate Africa is a young organization,
Okay.
and is part of the reason why we're having this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the government, most of the time, in most of these, strategic, areas, we still have the challenge of ignorance or self-centeredness, which some people call corruption.
Vested interests.
Vested interests. What we are trying to do is use the case study of some unicorns in Africa, like your ShopRites of this world, MTNs of this world, have success story in certain markets, and when you want to go into the bigger market, they will even come to you because they know that you're going to solve a lot of problems for them with their unemployment, with their issues, potentially generate more tax revenue for them. So for now, we've not directly engaged with the government. What we're doing now is working with the private sector organizations on ground for now. But then the next wave is to then start engaging the public sector, authorities.
Okay.
We're working on a 30-year plan for now, which might be reviewed upwards, but we believe that we need that long to be able to say that if I'm not here tomorrow, there is the next generation that's continuing with the work.
And what do you reckon will happen in that 30-year plan?
Well, if I'm a bit Machiavellian to think about, with the end in sight, in 30 years, the goal is to have industries, to have entrepreneurs who are captains of industries, who are employing people, entrepreneurs who have sustainable industries, businesses that is change the narrative of the African continent, where unemployment is reduced. I mean, it's been done. Now, very recently, you have an example of countries in Asia who had problems after the Second World War.
Yes.
South Korea, as an example, after the Second World War, it was so bad that, the American soldiers were there. There was reports in Western press that, a lot of the business people used to mix sand with their rice to make it more. It was so bad. But then, within the last few years, South Korea now,
with a plan,
has produced a lot of success stories. Samsung, I mean, this is a Samsung,
we're not advertising
in front of you. I'm not advertising. However, came from that country. There's a lot of success stories, and it's all come from innovation. So in 30 years' time, the goal and the plan, not the hope, is that we will have a continent where innovation is key in the education system, in the psyche of the population, and in the plan of the government, so that we know that you cannot get to prosperity by just going to school, by just getting educated. It has to be the right education, and there has to be a continuous loop. And
innovation must really center around where you have comparative advantage, really. Yes. You've talked about farming, which I think is still the largest employer of labor in a country like Nigeria that has over 200 million people. Your initiative is not, there are certain out organizations in Africa or even in diaspora that kind of like run similar type of initiatives. What makes you different? What makes Innovate Africa different?
Well, Innovate Africa is unique in the sense that there are so many organizations centered on innovation, and all they're trying to do is the unitary innovation focus, where you have Innovate UK as an example. It's not in Africa. However, Innovate UK is focused on the UK. Okay. You have different, you have Innovate, Norway, which is focused on Norway. Now, with Innovate Africa, the first thing is we're not looking at a particular country. We're looking at 54 countries. But we're not looking to go it alone. Innovate Africa is meant to be a bridge for diaspora organizations looking to get into the African continent to make things happen. If you think about LinkedIn as an example, I'm not advertising for anybody, but if you're looking to connect with professionals, you might go on Google, you might go on Facebook, you might go on Twitter, but you know that LinkedIn has the biggest database potentially for you to connect to other professionals. Now, it comes to the time where you want to do something back home. You need a network where you can meet other partners, you can meet like-minded people, you can have case studies, you can have intelligence. Innovate Africa is that place where you can go, and it's a bridge, it's a platform. It's not about competition, but collaboration.
Very recently, I found out that to go to Cape Verde, which is located on the continent of Africa, you would need to come to Europe first. You need to fly to Europe.
Yes.
And what really should be like a 5-6 hour journey could end up taking a whole day, 3 stops. Movement is still a major problem in Africa. A lot of Africans still struggle to get visas to move within Africa. So even Africa within itself is not opening the doors. How important is this in your 30-year plan, in actualizing your 30-year plan? Because if you're looking at working within the continent, really, I think movement is absolutely important. Yeah. Do you have a plan for this?
Well, it was a very wonderful moment earlier this year where the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement was signed into law and Nigeria ratified it. And it was like almost like eventually Nigeria joined. Yeah. We don't know what happened behind the scenes, but suddenly President Muhammadu Buhari of Nigeria went to Niamey in Niger and signed up to it. It is not perfect. It is not Uhuru. It is not promised land.
So the borders are closed at the moment.
Yes.
On the east
southern
side.
Now we are the starting block of the road to interconnectivity internally on the African continent. We have a terrible problem in terms of flying, in terms of road movement, but there is a project which is now beginning to start. Not the air travel, the land travel. There is an Africa, gateway project where basically all the different countries are being linked together. Now, within the plan that we have, one of the things we are looking at is how an entrepreneur, a guy with idea, who's not a money man, can wake up in Djibouti one day and say, hey, I want to go and do some business in Accra. Or he can wake up in Accra and say, you know what, I want to go to Soweto tomorrow. Since we signed that Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, you had all these xenophobic issues.
Right on the back of it, yeah.
Just as it happened.
Yeah.
Now, we've also had a lot of people saying, well, we don't have the IT infrastructure to support it and all that. But when you think about even when the European Union started, it took a bit of time. When you have the North Africa free trade agreement that was set up for most countries to be able to trade with the US, a lot of things happen. It takes time. Now, given the backdrop of the bureaucracy in Africa, the public sector is going to take time. However, one of the things that happened in the history of innovation, when railways started in the US, the car manufacturers had to transport their car from one part of the US to the other. They started making railways. They started making rail lines. The government had to stand in. What happened then was that the law caught up with innovation. Innovation creates a lot of different things. It makes sure that the government rises up. When innovation starts and things begin to happen across the country, it will be tedious, it will be onerous initially. The government will stand up. Within our plan, one of the key pillars we have there is the interconnectivity of the countries to be able to trade. Because if you help a country to go from Norway, from US, from the UK, to go to the continent, one of the key things they need is to be able to go from one country to the other, the supply chain, the movement. So it's one of the intrinsic parts of our plan. And it's a big problem now, but the starting block has been ticked off, which is the Continental Free Trade Agreement. It will not happen overnight in terms of the actualization of it. Even the Organization of African Unity that became African Union didn't happen overnight. So we have started the journey, and eventually, within those 30 years, we are hoping that Innovate Africa will create a lot of disruptions and things that will happen that will make those things happen quicker.
Okay. Within the organization itself, Innovate Africa, because the bigger you get now as an organization, then the interests get bigger and stronger. So what's your governance structure within the organization itself?
So, because we are a social enterprise, we ensure that there is a lot of openness. So we have a global advisory board where basically we have experts in different areas from different parts of the world within the board. The global advisory board is like the overall governing council. Then from there we have the executive management team. We have the global country leaders committee, and then we have the volunteer group. So basically, you have the Global Advisory Board ratify and agree our strategic plan. So now we're working on the 2021, strategic plan. That is, what the board agrees on. Then you have the executive management team that actually on a day-to-day basis works on, hands-on on this plan. Now you have the country leaders, committee where you have, now in about 8 countries, the 9th is about to come on board. We have, the US, Australia, Canada, Germany, France.
Diaspora, basically.
In the diaspora, countries where you have, substantial interest and pockets of the diaspora. So coming on board, but Brazil is the one that's almost coming on board.
Okay.
So the whole idea is basically to have these, coordination of activities, but at the same time you have, governance and you have a check and balance system. And also being the founder, I don't want to be able to unilaterally just run and do anything.
Indeed.
It is important that
checks and balances.
People who check what I want to do. I don't just say today, yeah, I'm going to China, and it happens. So that's the whole idea.
Okay, so obviously on a year-to-year basis, you come up with plans. How at the beginning of the year, like we're just right at the end of the year right now, so it's a good time to ask this question. What's been the plan for this year, and how much of it have you actualized so far?
Well, one of the key things we focused on this year was to crack the USA, which is basically to have representation in the USA, awareness in the USA, and coming together of a group in the USA.
A tricky zone, big zone.
It's a very important strategic point for us. As of last year, we announced on social media that the US is one of the areas we want to crack. And then we were able to do it. So we now have, in the US, we have 4 regional heads, covering the north, south, east, and west. Now, the interesting thing is that because of the history of slavery and a lot of the rivalry between the African Americans and the immigrant Africans, which I'm sure you know the story.
It's a problem.
It's a very interesting region
Indeed,
that we're very interested in. And we're happy that we were ahead of target. We're saying that, by the 3rd quarter, we are planning and we are aiming to be able to, grow our presence and kind of enter into the US. We achieved that by the 1st quarter.
Oh.
Now, also, we wanted to have someone come on board to look at, the commercial element of what we do. So we're able to appoint a global commercial director, which was one of the plans. We were also looking to sort of create some, local partnerships, which we've been able to create. We were looking to create about 6. We didn't hit the 6. We created 4. Like any plan, you don't always have 100% in every area. So we had those plans, and we also wanted to have more awareness in terms of the UK, and that is happening where we now have, different organizations saying, coming to us and asking if they can partner with us. I'm here today. The organization is moving from strength to strength.
I mean, the African diaspora is a huge. Do you have a number for the African diaspora?
Yes. So the African diaspora, according to report, is anything from 410 to 430 million.
That's a continent in itself. So if the African diaspora is Africa is estimated to be like 1.3, 1.2 billion.
Yes.
So really, almost a third of the continent
is outside.
Is outside. Is that a good thing?
Well, before I answer that question, there was an article on BBC some years ago, and it said Africa's secret weapon is its diaspora. And when I read that article, it was the beginning of the siege for Innovate Africa, because I realized that a lot of the challenges we have, the solution is in the diaspora. It's not ideal that we have a lot of the best brains, quote unquote.
Indeed, yeah.
Which is, you can contest that, because those on the ground, if they had the same opportunity,
indeed, yeah,
may compete on the
environment
same level.
Conditions, yeah.
It's not ideal, but what the reality, don't let's fool ourselves, is that a lot of the experienced Africans are outside the continent. However, what I see and have found based on research, we've conducted about 5 researches, is that most of these diaspora technocrats, experts, have 2 things that has been a barrier. Most of their information comes from Western media. And number 2, because of the pestering of families, extended and close from back home, they've just cut off and close off themselves from the African continent. They've not, and most of the time, the opportunities they've seen has been cultural or social to engage with the continent.
Well, a lot of people remit though.
That's a different thing. Remittance is one of the big areas as well.
Okay.
I'll come to remittance in a minute. However, the thing is that there has been no platform that's been there, like a track to run, where they can sort of give back, not just money, but their skill sets, their network, information, things like that. You know, I'll give you a very simple example. We had a guy who was a tenant of my dad way back, you know, over 30 years ago. Printer is still on the same level. I mean, that was when I was a boy.
Stencil and stuff.
He's still printing and doing the same thing on the same level. He doesn't know how to go to the next level. There's a lot of owner managers across the continent in the same boat, where the diaspora can easily give their skill set to take them to the next level, because they can do it in their sleep. That's what they do for a living.
Indeed, yes.
And I think the first question you asked, or the question was, is it a good thing?
Yes.
It's not necessarily ideal. However, based on where we are, it is what it is.
It can be an advantage.
But it can be an advantage.
Interesting. Okay, so we've talked about your global spread. Obviously, you're in 9 to 10 zones across Europe, where the core diaspora audience is Australia. Well, the other side of the world. So it now brings me, we're at the end of the year, and I know you're putting an event together, and that's on the 11th of December.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So what we tried to do, starting from 2 years ago, is to bring our network together, the UK network, and celebrate another year, talk about what we've been able to achieve, almost like...
Is this your first one?
This is the third one.
Okay.
So it's almost like a SWOT analysis of our year.
Okay.
Tell them, you know, our challenges, what we've been able to do very well, the opportunities in the year ahead, and the threats to achieving some of our goals. So on the 11th of December, we are putting together, you know, an event as well as a social. DJ Laddie is going to, you know, your friend.
Shout out to DJ Laddie.
He's going to be playing.
Yeah.
But we also have, you know, serious talk being sort of hosted by Max Bankole-Jarek, who used to run BBC Focus on Africa. Basically looking at the role of the diaspora in solving the problems faced on the continent of Africa. So we're going to have a panel, and within that panel we have Marian Hassan, who is the lead negotiator for Somalia at the World Trade Organization. We have Paolo Mukuza, who is the global commercial director for Innovate Africa. We have Cynthia Wright. Paolo is going to fly in from Sweden. Cynthia Wright is coming from Australia. She runs something called Building Communities Initiative. We also have Wayne McIntosh, who is resident in the UK, who runs Friends of the Caribbean, because we're trying to bring Africa, you know, Africans in the diaspora and the Caribbeans to actually begin to understand we are not enemies. The narrative might have made us think we may be, but we are not. So that day we're going to talk business, but we're also going to let our hair down and just boogie and have some good time.
Okay, I'll share a bit of information on that. And if you'd like to be a part of this event, it's a strictly by invitation event. And if you'd like to partake in it, you can go onto our website, djamedia.com, djamedia.com, where you find all you need to do to know about it. And if you want to know more about the organization, you can check out innovateafrica.org.uk. That's innovateafrica.org, your UK. Or you go on Instagram on their Instagram handle, Innovate Africa. And finally, how can the public help you?
Thank you very much. So the public can follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. We push out things regularly. The first way they can help us is we're always looking for volunteers. Volunteers in the area of marketing, especially social media marketing. We're currently looking for community managers. So if there's anyone who wants to sort of try their hands on, you know, social media, not try their hand in the sense that lend their hand, we will be happy. We also, for instance, we're always looking for writers to write on different subjects, where we need researchers to kind of research into different areas of the African continent. And we also need sponsors. This is one area where I think I've been shy in talking about it when I'm public, but I think we do need sponsors from corporate and individual sponsors.
We share that vision too.
Who share the vision, who are interested in the same market, and who want to make things, you know, to have a new African, you know, narrative. Not what the mainstream media is portraying, but to be able to help us show the world that it is feasible, it is possible. And one of the things we're also trying to do is Innovate Africa Summit, which is another story. However, we will need a lot of supporters for that, financially and from a corporate perspective. So if the, and also those who just want to know more about what we do can just follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and just give a feedback. And you know, a continuous loop of feedback is good for us to be able to know what we are doing well and what we could be doing
looking
better
at as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Just to recap on the event that comes up on Wednesday, the 11th of December, and it will be holding at the Hamilton House, Marble Place off Euston Road, London. And remember, if you'd like to be a part of it, just go on to djamedia.com and click on the link there for Innovate Africa and register. Very limited spaces left. I'll stress that right now. So if you want to be a part of it, you want to jump on that. Mr. Dotun Adeoye.
Thank you very
awesome.
much. Yeah, thank you.
That was nice and sweet.
It's been great.
We're going to have a break. It's National HIV Testing Week. And we're going to be having our next guest to come on the show and tell us what they're up to and how far they've been doing that. Stay tuned.